Welcome back to another episode of Fire, Flower, and Fur. The first thing that I'd like to do is apologize for the extended time between our episodes. It's 2020, guys. Everybody is dealing with a lot of stuff. The Mitchells are no different. I got diagnosed with uterine cancer in June, had surgery. I'm doing well. I'm coming up on my 6-month checkup, but I'm not nervous. My husband just had his own little scare with possible cancer, ended up having some throat surgery 5 days ago. So I don't know if you're going to hear him much. If you do, it's going to be him coughing a little bit. No Rona on this end, just a very, very, very sore throat. And then on top of that, my father-in-law passed away in August, which, as you all know, is devastating when you lose somebody you love. The kind of special thing that came out of this, well, there's our fur fighting over a ball. The special thing that happened coming out of such devastating, thing was that when my children, it's snowing outside too, so they're wild. My husband and his sisters went through the house and they ran across a bunch of old family recipes. So my husband and I have really gotten excited about trying some of them. Full disclosure, we did try this one once already. I'm going to tweak it just a little bit, but we don't have any end footage because it had to cool and then he got called out on a search and rescue. So we don't have any end footage, but the last time we did it, it turned out really good. These are called honey caramels. They are his grandmother's recipe. I have never really been successful making caramels, and these turned out really well. I hope today they work as well. You can see, now these are 2 weeks old, babe?
Yep.
2 weeks old, and look. The outside has started caramelizing, but look how soft they still are. It's a beautiful consistency. So honey caramel. The recipe, 2 cups of white sugar, 1 cup of honey, 1 cup of light corn syrup, a can of condensed milk, some vanilla, and a square of butter. And it says cook sugar, syrup, honey together until the sugar is dissolved. Add the margarine. Stir until melted and add the condensed milk. You guys didn't need to sit and watch me do all of that. Now, for today's difference, I did 1 cup of white sugar and 1 cup of brown sugar because I love brown sugar. As you can see, we are boiling. So I have put in the sugar, the caro syrup, the honey, and the butter. I am now going to add the sweetened condensed milk. The directions are not super clear as far as what to do. But because we have made caramels and this kind of similar thing before, I know that I am going to cook this mixture. My husband just reminded me what kind of butter. The recipe says margarine or butter, but knowing Bert's grandmother, I'm sure they used real butter. And at our house, we typically use unsalted, because of all of the spices and everything he uses. But I used salted in this because I think back when that was done, I'm guessing that they didn't have unsalted butter. So this is salted butter. If the only thing that you have at your house is unsalted butter, you may want to just sprinkle a little bit of salt in with it. But for the most part, it's a pretty simple caramel recipe. So I cooked the sugar, the caro syrup, the honey, the butter until everything was boiling. I have now added a can of sweetened condensed milk, not evaporated milk. The sweetened condensed milk. I'm not a huge believer in specific brands. But that's what we put in it. And even though the recipe doesn't say it, I know from past experience I am going to cook this to what they call probably a medium ball stage. So the way candy goes, or the way this kind of stuff goes, And this is what I learned from my mother. We have a Pyrex dish that we just pour a little bit of cool water in, and you dump a little bit of the concoction in. And when we were doing homemade suckers, you put the candy in there and you can actually hear it crack, and it keeps all of its strings. That's hard, or that's the crack. Hard ball is a little bit less than that. Soft ball is when you dump it in and it will hold a ball, but it's very, very soft. We're kind of in between those where we want it to be a medium, and I will show you when we get to that point. So I'm going to sit and let this cook and boil. I'm over a flame. We have a gas stove here, but we cooked stuff on our electric oven at our other house, and it was fine. I love the gas, but you don't have to have gas. I can sit and mess with my gas and control it a little bit better. When we talk about boiling, you want it to be a good rolling boil, but of course you don't want it boiling everywhere. The recipe also says add vanilla, and I know, because I am a vanilla whore, I've said this before, that you want to put the vanilla in right before you pour it into the pan. For this recipe, there's a lot of different vanillas. The only thing that I'm going to say is please, please do not buy the imitation vanilla. I know vanilla is expensive right now. I do. There are a lot of really good alternatives. Some great ones in the regular grocery store, but please don't buy the dollar vanilla. You'll taste the difference. I am lucky enough to be living in an area where there's people. It's kind of cute. The woman, her daughter is in the orchestra, and they do a fundraiser every year to help her daughter go on trips. And her parents live in Mexico, so they order in this amazing Mexican vanilla. And okay, help me out, babe. How do you describe Mexican vanilla? It's earthy, right?
But it's not too sweet. So it's not, you don't get the sense of candy with it, and you don't get the sense of
like ice cream.
Yeah.
It's a beautiful, rich, earthy flavor. So this is what I'm using. Now, I have found, just in our local grocery store, this brand of Mexican vanilla. I found it in the Mexican stores in town, but I found this in the grocery store. And if this is all you can get, it's not very expensive, and it's a great alternative. It doesn't have quite the same, it's not quite as rich as this stuff, but it's a really good alternative. I have 2 or 3 different types of vanilla that I like, but Mexican vanilla, for some reason, in this candy worked really, really well. All right, so you can see that we're getting a good rolling boil here. I know for a fact that this is not ready, but I'm going to show you what I mean when we talk about testing. A lot of people love a candy thermometer. I have a candy thermometer, but I watched my mother do this for years, and it's just what I do. So, little Pyrex dish. My mom used a mug. I mean, there's nothing special about what you're putting it in. I think glass is probably better. A little bit of cool water. That's just tap water. And I'm going to take the spoon and I'm going to drizzle it. Now, I know what's going to happen right now, because I know it's not ready, is the water is going to turn milky, and you're going to be able to see that the candy isn't holding together. Okay, it's cooked farther than I expected. So you can see that the water's kind of turning milky. If I run my fingers through it, the candy itself is starting to hold, but it's not ready, because look at the amount of milk in there. If you pull that candy out, can you see how it's starting to ball up, but it's not ready yet. When we were little, we would help my mother cook candy, because we got to taste the candy when it was coming out of the tester. Okay, so this is actually close. That was farther along than I expected. It's funny because you can actually start smelling it. This is something about honey. I can't explain it, but you can smell the honey cooking. And it is a glorious smell. I hope we're around when they create smell-o-vision with TV, because cooking shows are going to be completely different. If I'm walking around funny, it's because both of our kids are here on the floor helping. Okay, so as I'm stirring, I can feel the candy start thickening up. So I'm going to go for another test. You can see that the water is not as milky. It's still not quite ready. If I was putting something like this on caramel corn, this would be a good consistency, because I don't want to make caramel corn that tears your teeth out. So you can see it's balling up. I would consider that a soft ball. So that would be a great caramel corn recipe. Not quite ready. But when we get to this point, it actually happens quite quickly. My husband isn't much of a caramel fan, but I love it. And I think I got that from my mom. A good caramel. I was excited to get this because, like I said, I can make a pretty decent caramel corn recipe, but actual caramels I have not done really well with. I went through a stage several years ago where I was trying to make caramel, and that recipe you weren't supposed to stir, and I had to stir, and he just laughed and laughed and laughed at me because I was obsessed, and I just finally had to throw away the recipe because I could not ever nail it. Anyway, so the caramel recipe that I had tried for such a long time was a Nadia G recipe. I loved her. We loved watching her on TV. And I could not nail that recipe. I got to the point where I was angry about it. And so I finally just had to give it up. So when we found this recipe, so again, Bert's grandmother's recipe, when we found this recipe, I was excited because I love honey. I'm obsessed with honey and I love caramel. But I was also very nervous because I didn't know. Oh, okay, so this is closer. So you can see how it's holding up in the bottom. The milk is still there. It's always going to be a little milky because of what's in it. But when you pull it out, see that? It's still got a tiny bit to go, but it's going to happen quickly because there's a fine line between medium ball and hard ball. And yes, I just barely sampled that. Now here's the funny thing. Like I said, we tried these last week, 2 weeks ago. Great caramel recipe, but I can tell that's not quite right. You want to know why? We haven't hit it with vanilla yet. Funny story. I got all of those wrapped, snacked on them off and on for about a week. And then he comes home from work one day and he's like, did you take some of those with you to school? Because all of a sudden it was like half of the pan was gone. And he was just like, oh, geez, you either had a really, really rough day at work and you ate half a pan of caramels, or you shared. I shared. I took them to school with me. Okay, we're going to try it because, oh, no water. This is what happens when you start telling a story. Oh, and yep, I think we're there. Okay. So the caramel itself has thickened up. I can feel it. You can see it when it's pouring out that it's thicker. And here we go. And it's kind of ribboning a little bit. See that? Perfect. I'm going to turn the heat off of it. I'm going to stir it okay. See? So there's a little bit of softness if I were to hold that, but it's holding its shape. That's a good medium ball. So that is done. I'm going to stir this until the bubbles stop. Well, maybe not stop, but soften a little bit. And then the funny thing is, this calls for 1 teaspoon of vanilla. Honey, you don't measure vanilla. You feel it with your heart. So that's probably 2.5 because I overdumped. You don't want the vanilla to take away from the honey, but it definitely adds. So you dump the vanilla in, and I don't know if you could see that or not, but it actually bubbled up because this has alcohol. Real vanilla has alcohol in it, and that just cooked all the alcohol out of it. So for those of you that are serving children and are concerned about an alcohol content, if you put it in and it's still hot, you don't have to worry about it. It cooks the alcohol out and it leaves the flavor. So now we've got a nice rich caramel, good old Pyrex, just a square Pyrex that I have sprayed with cooking spray, and I am going to dump this in. I have put the pan on a pad because this caramel is hot. Guys, don't ever, you've got to be so careful because this molten liquid, if it gets on your skin, it will burn, and because of the consistency of it, you can't just wash it off. It sits on your skin and it burns. I speak from experience, so please be careful when you are dumping anything up like this. And 2 weeks ago when we made this, when did you get that call out? It was like at 7 at night, wasn't it? So it sat for a very long time. So this is going to sit for several hours. Glass pan, very hot product. Yeah. Very, very hot. And it is going to take a significant amount of time for this to cool. So we will leave one of the cameras out and we will record either tonight or tomorrow morning what it looks like when they cut. When I cut them before, they were still a little bit soft. So I was able to cut a shape, and then I just laid it in plastic and rolled it, and they turned into this shape. Not the most beautiful. I don't know if we have wax paper. Probably don't have wax paper. They would be pretty in wax paper, and I've seen Carmels that you purchase in, like fancy little shops that have wrapped them in waxed paper, and I think they're beautiful, but this worked fine. My technique's not fabulous.
Looks good for our neighbors.
Exactly. So there you are, guys. Grandma Lorna's honey caramels. 2 cups of sugar. This time around I did brown sugar and white sugar. 1 cup of honey. 1 cup of light corn syrup. 1 can of condensed milk. A teaspoon of vanilla. And a square of butter. We used salted real butter. So that's it. I will see you on the flip side when this has cooled off and we can show you what it looks like when it's cut. Thanks for joining us. All right, it is 9:30. These have been cooling for, what would you say, like 3 or 4 hours? And I think I cooked these a little bit longer than the last batch. The top of it, if you push on there, you can see that there's a dimple. My husband asked me about this. I think that's because I sprayed the pan pretty good. Regardless, we're going to see how this goes. Just a good old kitchen cutter, scraper, whatever. And I'm going to use that to cut a piece out. That didn't take much resistance, so that was good. And I am going to okay. I just thought about this just barely, and that was not a bad idea. So you can see that they're still soft. They hold their they hold their shape, but they're still a nice soft consistency. The brown sugar didn't change the flavor too much, actually. You can still taste the honey. These are the ones that I did last time. And you can see a slight color difference. And there seems to be a bit of more richness. I think I would use the brown sugar again. I like it. The consistency of this turned out great. Now, if this sat for a significant amount of time, it would slough off again. You're already seeing it a little bit, but it held its shape when I cut it, and the caramels are sitting here holding their shape. So I'm really happy with the cook time on this. That, like I said earlier, that becomes you kind of learn. If you guys would like to use a candy thermometer, there is nothing wrong with that. In fact, a lot of people use that. But like I said, I grew up watching my mother just use the water technique, and that's what I'm comfortable with. Parchment paper, I looked, we don't have any waxed paper. So parchment paper, I'm just going to roll it, and I'm going to twist it. And those are nice, pretty little caramel packages that we can give away for Christmas. So I'm very pleased. Grandma Lorna's honey caramels. So this was a great first episode for family recipe roulette, and I hope to do a bunch more. So if you like this, give it a like, and we are happy, Fire Flower and Fur, to be back. Maybe you want to show. We got both furs sitting here watching. So there's the Festus. Yep. And there's Phoebe, who is the best kitchen helper ever. So thanks for joining us, and we're excited for the next round. Till next time, guys.